Most people hear the word ceasefire and think it simply means the fighting stops. But the reality is far more complicated, and what is unfolding right now in Gaza is one of the most detailed and difficult ceasefire processes the world has seen in decades. Let's start with the basics. According to the United Nations, there is no single, universally accepted definition of a ceasefire. What we do know is that a formal ceasefire agreement is a written document between two or more conflict parties that lays out its purpose, specifies the date and time it takes effect, and, critically, sets out how compliance will be monitored and verified. That last part is far harder than it sounds. Now, here's the part that most news coverage skips over. A ceasefire is not the same as peace. Experts at academic institutions describe it as creating political space, a pause in the violence, so that deeper, harder negotiations can actually begin. The logic, according to researchers, is that peace talks struggle to gain traction while hostilities are ongoing, because active violence constantly reinforces distrust between the sides. So a ceasefire is really the floor, not the ceiling. With that foundation in place, let's walk through how a modern ceasefire is actually built, using the current Gaza process as a real-world case study because it illustrates every single stage. Step 1 is the negotiation itself. According to reports, the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas that took effect in January 2025 was brokered with mediation from the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. It came after more than a year of fighting that followed the Hamas-led attacks on southern Israel in October 2023. Getting both parties to sign anything required months of backchannel diplomacy, and according to analysts at American University, the framework for the deal had essentially been on the table since at least May of 2024, meaning the talks stalled repeatedly before a final agreement was reached. Step 2 is the structure of the deal itself. According to Britannica and multiple international sources, the agreement was built in 3 phases, each with specific sequenced obligations. Phase 1, lasting 42 days, included a halt to active fighting, the withdrawal of military forces from densely populated areas, the release of hostages held by Hamas and Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, and a surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. These early, concrete, verifiable actions are standard in modern ceasefire design. They build trust incrementally between sides that deeply distrust each other. Step 3 is monitoring and verification. According to the UN's own guidance on ceasefire mediation, monitoring typically involves both human observers and technical tools, which can include aerial drones, satellite imagery, and on-the-ground teams. Verification means checking whether reported violations are accurate, and investigation means attributing responsibility when a violation is confirmed. In practice, according to reports on the Gaza ceasefire violations were recorded on multiple sides even after the agreement took effect, which, according to researchers at the University of Notre Dame, who studied nearly 4 decades of conflict data, is actually common. Their research found that only around 20% of ceasefires hold from the very start, but importantly, they also found that prior ceasefire failures are the best predictor of an eventual successful one. In other words, early instability does not automatically mean a peace process is doomed. Step 4 is where things get significantly harder. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Gaza ceasefire entered its second phase in January 2026, after Israel confirmed that Hamas had returned the remains of the last hostage from the October 2023 attacks, fulfilling the terms of Phase 1. Phase 2, according to multiple reports, involves some of the most politically sensitive tasks: the full demilitarization of Hamas, a complete withdrawal of Israeli military forces from Gaza, establishing a new transitional governing authority for the territory, and beginning reconstruction. According to a U.S. envoy statement reported by NPR, Phase 2 will establish a new Palestinian administration in Gaza and begin the full demilitarization and rebuilding of the territory. The body overseeing this is called the Board of Peace, an international mechanism that was endorsed by a United Nations Security Council resolution in November 2025. According to the Baker Institute, this body represents an evolution from press statements and ceasefire terms into an actual architecture for governance. However, reports from the House of Commons Library note that Hamas has been critical of the board, calling it a form of international guardianship, while separately, disputes remain over the sequencing of disarmament versus reconstruction. According to the European Council on Foreign Relations, a key debate centers on whether Hamas must fully disarm before reconstruction begins, or whether reconstruction must begin first to create the conditions for disarmament. Now here's why the reconstruction question matters so much. According to a joint assessment published by the European Union and the United Nations in April 2026, conducted alongside the World Bank, reconstruction needs in Gaza are estimated at over $71 billion over the next decade. The same assessment found that human development across Gaza has been set back by an estimated 77 years, with more than 371,000 housing units destroyed or damaged, more than half of hospitals non-functional, and nearly all schools destroyed or damaged. According to that same report, around 1.9 million people have been displaced, with more than 60% of the population have lost their homes. The UN and EU stressed that given the scale of need, recovery efforts must run in parallel with humanitarian action, and that without a sustained ceasefire and unimpeded humanitarian access, neither recovery nor reconstruction can succeed. So what does all of this tell us about how a ceasefire actually works? It tells us it is a process, not a moment. It starts with a negotiated pause in fighting, built around verifiable early steps that create enough trust to attempt the harder work. That harder work includes governance, disarmament, security arrangements, and eventually reconstruction, each of which involves political disagreements that did not disappear just because the guns went quiet. According to analysts cited across multiple institutions, Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire is considered significantly more challenging than Phase 1, precisely because the decisions required are far more political in nature. What to watch for next? The critical milestones in Phase 2, including whether a functional transitional governance body takes hold in Gaza, whether international reconstruction funding begins to flow at scale, and whether the demilitarization process moves forward, will each serve as indicators of whether this ceasefire is on a path toward a durable peace, or whether the process faces further setbacks. If you want to follow this story as it develops, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover the major international stories every single day, with the full context you need to actually understand what is happening.